Abby Falik is the founder and CEO of Global Citizen Year. She is a dynamic leader who enables young people to gain first-hand experience in the field. Even though she has experienced a great deal of success, she was frank and open about where she had made her most important mistakes. We discuss how Abby learned about the dangers of presuming someone else's reality by walking in their shoes and riding on their bus. She teaches us an important lesson about trusting the bird over the book. I asked her some practical questions about how to choose your path in the world and how to talk to funders about hard truths. Let's listen. So again, I'm here with Abby Falik, and we're going to talk a little bit about failures from the field. As I was describing to you earlier, I'm really interested in people like yourself who have been leaders in the social development field for a while, who have had a lot of experience on a variety of different projects. And I think in this field, we are all under pressure to show the success story, to show the impact. And very often when we have a short period of time, we'll get right to the concise success story or the tagline that sells our organizations the best. But for those of us who are in the sector, we often find ourselves maybe in the evening having a beer with our colleagues and talking about the frustrations. And also talking about the times where things didn't go as well. Maybe they could be called failures or just challenges, and what we learned from it. So I guess first, to set the tone a little bit, maybe you could just tell me kind of what you see as your current mission. I know you're leading Global Citizen Year at the moment. You can just tell me briefly about that mission so I know where we're going for, and then we'll talk about maybe how you got there.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Well, this is a timely, always timely topic, and one where I have plenty of experience, so I'm excited to share my experience. So Global Citizen Year is on a mission to make it normal for kids from all backgrounds to have the opportunity to take a Global Citizen Year between high school and college. And it's a year spent living and working in other parts of the world, both to learn about the world and to learn about themselves, and so that they can sort of understand the intersection of those two things as they move into college and over time into their careers. And one of the reasons I'm most intrigued by this topic is, in a sense, I think we're in the business of breeding a new generation of social impact leader by giving young people firsthand experience of poverty and development and having them stay in communities longer than is typical. So our fellows spend a full school year living with a family, working on a local project in Africa, Latin America, and Asia, where invariably they come out the other side much more skeptical about what works and what's worth doing. And we talk about, what of what you have seen or done passes the walkaway test once you leave. And we talk about helping young people discern the difference between real good and feel good in creating social change.
I love that.
And so I think it's very resonant with this idea of being free to speak to failures is understanding how do we look with really clear eyes at what problem we're trying to solve, and then be able to present the evidence that suggests we're actually on track to do what we say we're trying to do.
Absolutely. So I love your phrase, real good versus feel good. In my experience and much of the experience of people I've spoken to, real good is hard, and it is also often the opposite of feel good when you're going through the process. Speaking specifically to your current project, when young people come out with that experience, how do you see their journey going forward? How do you work with them to continue along the pathway towards real good, even after they've discerned that maybe it's not as feel good as they thought?
Yeah, so I think we're very focused on making sure that our fellows, as we call them, come back and start college with both a realistic view of how hard this work can be, but an optimism and an idealism that comes from understanding that there are bright spots, that people are coming out of poverty, and that there are things that do work and things that they can throw themselves behind. So we continue to keep them connected to us as Global Citizen Year, providing them with opportunities to keep traveling, to do fellowships, to stay connected with each other. They often arrive, as freshmen on college campuses with a very different view toward all of the other freshmen who feel like, the cool thing to do is to start the new nonprofit. And again, our kids come in as the skeptics, and we call it freshman year jujitsu, which is really about how do you take the energy of the kid in your dorm who's selling donuts for Africa and recognize that they're probably really well-intentioned. They just haven't had the opportunity to live and work in the context that they're now presuming to want to help. And so how do you work with somebody's good intent and help them see that there might be other ways to think about what they're trying to do?
So since you work with young people in the sector, if one of these young people started something well-intentioned and it didn't work out, and they came to you for kind of advice, could you pick out a time in your life and career where you were part of something like that, you wanted to start something or be a part of something and it didn't work out, and kind of what you learned from that and how you overcame that, or the way you innovated around that?
I think, and I share this very proactively with all of our fellows, I'm very involved in the teaching and training and feedback and coaching, because it's a course in how to be a global citizen, how to be human, how to approach your life. And one of the frames is often that a good student learns from any teacher. And I think that that's especially true at the challenging points and true in failure. So an example that I often think about with deep humility was in the very first year of Global Citizen Year. I'd hired a couple of people, we'd launched a program in Guatemala, and had a program director in Guatemala who I was pushing pretty hard. So I was asking him to go each week to visit all of the fellows that he had placed in a certain region. I was sort of demanding certain reporting, coming back from him and asking him, or just assuming that he could do that reporting from the bus while he was traveling from one site visit to the next. And then I get an email on a Monday morning that says, I'm sorry, but I've resigned and I'll be out by the end of the week. And so this is the person in country who's the parent, the coach, the teacher, the only support for these 6 kids in our pilot program, and he's gone, and I have no other leads for who's going to replace him in Guatemala. And so I get on a plane, because I had no choice, and played his role for the next few weeks, and literally walked in his shoes, taking the buses, which were buses that transported all kinds of goods, not just people, and the chicken buses that were not only could you not get a seat, but the idea that I had suggested that he could be doing his work from the bus was crazy. I mean, my camera was stolen first time I walked in and tried to sit down. And meanwhile, the kids were super spread out, and there was so much about his reality that I had presumed from a distance, and I couldn't possibly have understood until I actually went there and experienced it. And it was such a humbling and critical learning for me about any role I've ever hired for since, which is that unless I have walked in the shoes of the person I'm asking to do a certain thing, I need to defer to them on what's appropriate, what's right. And if there is ever any friction or sort of discrepancy between what I'm seeing as I sit in the US and what I'm hearing from the field, I need to defer to the person who's actually there. There's this Buddhist notion that I love of, if there's a difference between the bird and the book in bird watching, trust the bird. And I just find it to be such an important reminder of how we can want to be empathetic, but what it means to actually, humble ourselves in that way.
Absolutely. So we see in our organization a lot of young people who are applying for jobs at Ubuntu who are very interested in getting into this social sector work. But obviously, as you say, when you take away those presumptions and you disabuse people of maybe that beauty of being on the ground, the bird or the book, you often can maybe lose some of that motivation. And being someone, I'm sure, who's familiar with the private sector and familiar with the philanthropy world, I think we can see that there are ways to have impact from a for-profit point of view if you decide to go through that and to support your social sector, or to get hands-on. And how, if let's say your niece or when your daughter grows up, they come to you with a situation and they're trying to decide between the social sector and the private sector. With all that you've seen, with the difficulties of the really doing good as opposed to feeling good, how would you advise somebody to take on that decision and look and try to balance those two worlds?
Yeah, well, I get this question all the time. So our alums come back, they're beginning to finish college, they come to me for advice about where to begin their careers. And the first thing that I say and truly believe is that for-profit and not-for-profit are totally arbitrary distinctions. It defines your tax status. But you can have a for-profit that is also for purpose. And I hate the term nonprofit because all it says is what you're not. So for me, it's much more about tapping into what drives you, what motivates you, what your purpose is, where you believe you can find meaning in your work. And for some people, they'll do that at McKinsey or Goldman Sachs. And they may be finding that meaning through connecting with other people or through making businesses better, or they might be finding that meaning by making a bunch of money and then investing it in causes that they care about. But I think increasingly there is a blurring of the lines between these sectors, and there will be opportunities for young people to act in a way that is for social purpose, independent of the sector or organization they choose to join.
And one final question. You are somebody who does fundraising, who's out there trying to keep your organization alive and thriving. What is the biggest thing that donors misunderstand, or the biggest gap between what you're trying to explain and the way they want to see you that you have to overcome?
Lots of things. I mean, I think what comes to mind first is about the overhead myth. And this notion that we hold not-for-profits to some standards around how much we can spend to hire exceptional talent, to invest in R&D and experimentation. And you imagine any public company being held to certain restrictions for how much they're able to spend in marketing their products, and we wouldn't have the iPhone. I mean, it just doesn't make sense. And I'm all for being scrappy and resourceful, focused on impact. It's important to be lean and highly efficient, but we can often do that to the detriment of the impact we're trying to have when we constrain ourselves and enter what people have called a starvation cycle, where you underinvest in the things that would actually enable you to thrive, and as a result, you're not actually able to scale to the problem, to scale to the size of the problem you're trying to solve. So for me, it's really about encouraging donors to understand that they need to be willing to take risks on things that might fail, and they need to be willing to invest in infrastructure, because at the end of the day, great people make great things happen, and unless we're in a position to actually compete for the best talent, we're never going to get out of the gate.
Well, you articulate that very precisely and very well. Do donors get it when you after you do that? Is there a high percentage of acceptance rate of your explanation, or is it still tough going?
I think we're getting there, and I think honestly, anytime we have the opportunity to sit one-on-one with somebody and talk them through, help them see what they value about their for-profit portfolio investment companies, and help make that translation. If you've got a smart donor sitting there thinking it through, then I think we've really got a chance of changing the narrative. And I think it's going to start with some people who get it, who are then vocal about it to their peers and to others. And I certainly think that institutional philanthropy has a long way to go in catching up. But I think we're starting to see the shift. And I think it's not a choice anymore. It's not a nice to have. It is apparent that the biggest social problems are barely being impacted by all of these tiny little dispersed not-for-profit efforts. And so if we're going to get serious about actually solving for quality education, childhood hunger, global development in a meaningful way, this is not the job of the not-for-profits. This is the job of everybody coming together and thinking in smart new ways about how the sectors work together and what's the role that philanthropy can play that's the highest impact.
Well, thank you very much. This was a great discussion.
Thank
I really
you.
appreciate your honesty and really actually learned a lot.